Hey everyone, I wanted to talk about something fun today. I wanted to talk about this OneForm video. This is the 15th OneForm video, but what I want to do is actually give some kind of introduction to what's going on at this point, because I was so tired at the point I made this video. I can hear it in my voice. I'm just, oh god, here's another video on OneForm. I'm like that during the introduction of this video, and I just want to say that I really appreciate it if you've been watching this far. If you have any feedback for me, or if you want to say like, hey, you really enjoyed the series, I'd really appreciate it if you could comment or like or subscribe or anything like that, because this channel is specifically dedicated to live coding, and this is a lot of work that I put into this library. So if you do want to see what the TypeScript conversion looks like, I do have a code conversation video that's going on my main channel that's going to discuss that here in the next month. But what I also want to show is that doing this OneForm library did take a lot of my time, and I would really appreciate any feedback you can give, because I mean, you can just hear my voice in the video. I'm so done just working, struggling so hard to build this library as quickly as possible. And honestly, I'm very happy with the results, and I'm very happy to talk about the next version that's coming out soon. But the point is to just say that if you've been watching this long, I really do appreciate it. It's awesome. Thank you so much. Now let's get to the actual video.
Hello and welcome to another video on OneForm. Now I've changed a few things, and I just came up with all these ideas last night, and I wanted to explain what they are. So one thing is the validation type was incorrect in the code. So if you look over here, this was actually named validations or validation types, which is incorrect. That's the name of the states here. So I renamed it to validation type, and then I was thinking about it. I was like, hang on, I remembered I had done this at work too, and I changed it to has field change validation. And the reason I'm doing that is because it's less restrictive, because these are options that you could turn on and off, and they're not states that you can only be in one at a time. So it most likely needs to be a Boolean then. So I have to change it to has field change validation, which I wanted to do on camera. So that's one thing here. Let's see, where is that? Then it wouldn't be change either. It would just be a Boolean. By default, I would expect this to be true, but it's fine because that way people know to pass it in. Like I said, you always have submit, so you don't have to worry about that. I really don't have to do this, but since they're all up there, I'll just leave them there. It's fine. It's not a big deal, but really this Boolean doesn't need to be up here. There's absolutely no reason for it. So we get rid of these. Yeah, we get these prop types dot bool. It's also optional, which is fine. What's wrong with this? Signed a value, but never used. Oh yeah, it's that thing. There, now it's assigned. All right, so what else changed? Use field. Validation occurs in use field, so it's easy. Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure what I'm gonna do with these, like has field change and stuff. Use field, as far as I know, it's the one that triggers the validation. So we're gonna have to rethink some things, potentially. And then fields and yeah, I just wanted to remember, I did not say this in the video, but if fields are in like a touched or visited state, that would happen when you display an error. Because if you're displaying an error and the field hasn't been touched, it's a very, like, they come in from the errors prop. So if you pass into OneForm, you pass in these errors here, it will mark all those fields as having been touched, even though they haven't been touched. Because if you have an error in the field, it wouldn't even display if the field's not touched. So that's important. As far as I know, it wouldn't display. No, that doesn't make sense. It would display. Yeah. But it would mark all the fields as touched anyway. I think there's a reason for that. So I can't remember now. You know what? I wrote this. I don't remember. I also changed some other things. The value, I noticed that this hook that we made called use values state, this use values state can be actually used for errors as well. And so I thought up some ideas for it on what I want to do to improve it so that you could use it for two things, because it needs to then take in not just values, but it also needs to take an initial value. And then I had a breakthrough last night in the OneForm component itself. And my breakthrough was that when you pass in errors, it wipes errors or values. It'll wipe the entire component, like not the component, but it'll wipe that particular state in the component. So if you want to override the errors, you would just pass errors as a new object and it would just wipe them. And now those are your errors. But in a lot of cases, like I was saying yesterday, is you might have real-time data and you might want to constantly be wiping it. You don't want to have to, in your component, keep track of the state of the form. That's not what you're supposed to do. And so I realized there is a way to make it so that you can merge these in. And originally I had it that way, but I took it out because you couldn't reset the form. But what if you had a prop called update errors? Yeah. What if you had another prop called update values or updated values? Sorry, updated, because this is not a function. This is a value. So yeah, updated errors and updated values. And then now if you pass a prop into those, it would override it. And I was thinking about some other things. There's a hook that doesn't exist But if you use OneForm, you could create the form and pass all these props here. And it doesn't, not including these. So you'd have like initial errors and initial values and all that stuff. And you're saying initial, why are you doing initial? Because you can deconstruct off of here and it would provide you with some functions like update errors or reset errors. And then you would call reset then update if you wanted to clear them. See what I'm saying? And then these, you're thinking like, wow, that's pretty cool. But how do you, like, this is outside of the form and I need to pass it in the form. And I don't want this to have to use an ID. There's no ID here. So it's like, how can I make this work? And then I realized I could have something like this or OneForm state. And then you could pass that in here. And I was like, well, that could work. So this is another option, is that you would, to use the form, you'd have to put the props in here and then pass them in. And so the form itself doesn't take props, or it could optionally take props instead. It could be an either or situation, or it could, like, basically it can internally do this. So it doesn't necessarily even, it needs to take props if it's going to do this internally, which could cause namespace conflicts. The point I'm saying is that there are other ways of getting data in here where that you can modify the form outside of the form. And that might even be more convenient in a lot of ways. Because having a function you can call to reset the form outside of the form could make a lot of sense. Now, like, what about the onChange and all that? Yeah, you would have to subscribe to it, and then you can publish to it the same way that we do with the other observables in the library. So I'm really thinking to myself that this makes a lot of sense. And I might rename publish to next, just so it follows RxJS. And then not just that, I think that's the standard JavaScript observable. Oops, wrong one. So in here, our observable create observable method has a get value, a publish, and a subscribe. I wonder if I change this to next, and then I add an error one for when there's an error. Although we'll never have errors in this, not that I know of. We shouldn't run into errors. We're just publishing and whatever. We're not actually doing any logic, and there's no pipeline to worry about. I'm wondering about that. I like the word publish because it makes sense, but next might be better because it just it makes you think this is an observable. And if I have the .get value, it's more like a behavior subject, but this is obviously a little non-standard. And then if you're going to use it outside of OneForm, so that's the thing. I developed this to be used internally in OneForm. If you're going to use it outside of OneForm, then okay, some things need to change. That's where I might do some renaming because other people might be using it who are not familiar. Or I just document that this has a publish method. And that's the other thing. Yeah, I'm not sure. This seems pretty cool. And even, it doesn't need to be OneForm state. You could have onChange or something like this and you just pass it in. There are a lot of other ways to handle this now. I don't want you to have to define a hook outside of it. I'd like you to be able to pass in props, but this could still work. It's definitely a possibility. Yeah, this is like making me think, wow, my whole world is turned upside down. That's what I'm thinking here. Now, none of this matters for us right now. So provided we use these, which I'm going to put them in, provided we use these two, basically I can work on this value state thing. I can have it take values in an initial state so that it can also be used for errors. And then that'll put us in a good spot. Seriously? I don't even have the initial props set up. Cool. I hope you understand like how crazy this is of an idea and how much it would change things. I'm going to add it to my notes here. I wonder if you can use the JS here. Yeah, it doesn't work. Okay. So I came up with some other ideas too. Yeah, use field value was one I came up with. I can't remember if I've already built this or not, but basically it's a way to get a field that is not registered. I have had this idea before. I remember having this idea after I wrote all these notes and everything. I was like, wait a second, I've done this before. Yeah. So basically I said before that registration was with component mounting, and they actually, registration in the old version would happen with the subscription to the values. But now I'm going to separate that out. And to separate it out, it also means we can have a use field value. And there was really no reason for this before, but the benefit is that I can put messages on input fields anywhere in the form by returning from onChange some state. You probably don't know what that means. So let me show you. When we have an onChange function in the form, you could pass it in as form changed, and it gives you the changed field name and a value, or values, all the values. And what you can do is when you want to change a value, you just return the name of the value and then the new value you want. And you usually want to obviously supplement what's already there. So it'd be something like values, this, and then you would replace in there certain characters or something like that. You would replace the all the A's with a letter B, which is really weird for people, but you might want to do that. I don't know. And so there are uses for this on-chain. But use field value. You can return a field, whatever, one. You can return random fields from here, and you can display a warning message now. Yo, don't do that. You can do this kind of stuff on a field that doesn't exist because you can use it as a message field. So you could say message whatever one, yo, don't do that. And then you can, so I think you have to have some knowledge of your fields at that point, but you could also tie field names to messages. So you could have name, you have to do it like this, name, message, like that. And then this is how you can control the message for that particular field, depending on how your form is set up. But you can basically output a message in your unchange, which is where you would be doing all the math anyway, to see if a field changed, to see if you want to display a message on a field. It's different than validations because validations are meant to be one-on-one with errors. But this is, messages are like field values. The only difference is if you do use field value, the fields are unregistered. So when you submit, they won't appear there. You don't want these ones submitted. But you do want the name field submitted because that would be something in your form. But if the name field's obviously not showing, then it wouldn't be registered and whatever. But that's what use field value is. It's a way to create a field that can display messages like this without having mounted first. And when I think about it now, if I have a field error and I have a field, I would have a field value field. I would have a field value component. That makes a lot of sense. So if I'm going to have a use field value, I'll definitely have a field value. Yeah, that makes sense. So those are all the changes that I thought about. There's a lot. I think it's a lot, personally. Sounds like a lot. But I think it's going to change the way the form works in a lot of good ways. Because now you'll be able to have real-time updates, which was not a requirement before, but it is a requirement now because I'm making this obviously the one form. So it needs to be able to accept real-time values. You can't force people to control the form state outside of the form. Yeah, sure, you could listen to onChange and you can manage that yourself with values and you could put your own errors in there. But the whole point is that everything's built into the form, then you should just put it in the form. So if you want to merge values for some reason or some new values came in and you don't care what's in the form necessarily, you just do update values. Now, how it would reconcile changes is it would probably still have to wipe those particular fields, but it would wipe specific fields rather than the entire values object, if that makes sense. There's not really a good way to merge or do reconciliation without doing way more complex logic, where you basically provide the user both fields. So it would like split the fields. And here's the thing is that OneForm is not managing your fields. You're doing that. But what you would do is you would have to have two fields. So you'd have to have a field here, and you'd have to have another field. I'll just self-close them. So you'd have two fields here or one field, sorry, you'd have one field. But if let's say somebody puts in a change. So the previous value of name, otherwise I'm just rambling. The previous value name was test or hang on, Mickey. Like that was the previous value of name. And then it had one field and it registered field, it said Mickey. But a real-time update came in and that changed to Mickey 2. At the same time, somebody's typing Mickey here, Mickey something. At the same time, somebody's typing like Phil, right? So then at the same time, what you got to do is then you have to display two fields and then allow the user to choose which one they want. See what I'm saying? This is something you would do in your form. I could create a form that could do this. But this is something that typically you would do because the place you work at or the company or the way you want to handle these conflicts is something that is going to be different for every project. I can't imagine that there's only one way to do conflicts like this. Sometimes you just want it to override, which is the default behavior I'm going to do. Or you might want to split the fields or create like a separate component that does it. And then it has a little X here, like have a little X here, and you can either delete the field altogether or you can accept the change or you can accept both changes. And now you have two of that field. And again, that might not be what you want because you might just want one name field. If you only have one name field, you can only accept one of these changes, right? Or you can merge them, right? There might be an icon here for merging them. And so these are all these things you can do to merge data and handle problems with one person editing the field at the same time as another person. That is absolutely not something I'm want to work on for this. This is like going to be way simpler. If we need to do that in the future, I can build a wrapper around it using the tools I'm going to provide myself to be able to build that kind of functionality. But that would typically be something I do for a company rather than something that this library would have in it. I just feel like that's very specific kind of information. And to do it would be pretty awesome. You could use Firebase and all this stuff to allow people to edit forms together, which there are reasons for why you would want to do it. Oh yeah, so I came up with an idea. So basically you would have your field, and then when another change comes in for your name, right, as you're typing, and there's as you're typing means there needs to be a debounce, and you got to program all that in and whatever. But somebody puts yo2 at the same time that you're putting yo3, then instead of displaying two fields, you would have one field and you'd have a message, a field message. And this would display the message for the field saying that this is the version that you're working with is out of date and this is another version. See what I'm saying? This is all implementation details that are going to be completely different for every single person's use case. So building it into the OneForm doesn't make any sense because these are all going to, this is like be a completely separate thing that you would build around OneForm's ability to be a state manager. So here, I'm not going to worry about it, but it is something that you could worry about if you wanted to. It's always a possibility. This thing is very powerful. It's built with all of that kind of iteration in mind. It was not built to make simple forms. It was built to make ridiculously complex forms. And because of that, everything can be optional because you can build whatever you want, however you want. And it makes it very simple to do that as it is a state manager. I don't think of OneForm as a form library. I think of it as a state manager, but if I release it as a state manager, it's going to be a pretty GIMP state manager because it's specifically designed for forms. Yeah, people would be like, okay, I don't understand why you're doing this. It doesn't make any sense because this state manager seems like weird. Normal states don't have errors in them. Yeah, actually states do have errors. Interesting. I wonder if you could use this to replace your state in your entire React app. That would be interesting, huh? You could do it. You could definitely do it. Oh my goodness. I wonder if I could, that would be a fun project. I want to finish it, but when I'm done with it, that would be a really good task. Make a React app using only OneForm. Okay. Yeah, I can add routing using OneForm and component state. Yeah, this would be really interesting to do. It's more like a proof of concept, okay? Because it's not 100% that this is going to work the way I expect. And honestly, like I said, it's a clutch solution, but it handles so many things for you and it makes it so easy. You can't have namespace conflicts, but in typical states you can too. Like with Redux, you can have namespace conflicts. If you put two reducers in there with the same name, they'll conflict. The difference is that, I don't know, I just feel like there's more to this thing. The one thing you wouldn't have is an onSubmit function because you wouldn't use it. That's why I was saying this is optional. It is, if you can see here, it's optional. The reason onSubmit is optional is because you might not need it. You might have a form that submits on change. And in this case, it might submit on submit. So there's one problem I still haven't solved with the form. And that is that when you have an onChange function, how can I ensure that you can do side effects in it with cancellation? I might have to handle that in a different way. So with RxJS, it's pretty easy to do that kind of stuff. But basically all I'm doing is calling a callback. And I guess you can in your code, if I'm using RxJS around it, I can handle the cancellation of whatever I'm working with because I would put a subject in here and just do subject.next and then handle that somewhere else. And so I'm still passing a callback in, but I'm handling the logic of what happens somewhere else. In React, the way you would do that is you would have a use state. And so in my, let's say form changed. If I want to listen to this and make fetch calls every time it's made, which is, I'm saying real-time data, or you're not submitting the form ever. So in here, somewhere up the line, you'll have a use state, which we could say form state. It's not really the form state though. It's you're changing the value that changed and the value of the value that changed. And this is meant to be like an RxJS subject, which most people watching this won't know what that means. But in RxJS, you can make a subject that is on the wrong side by doing this. And basically I can call .next on the subject and whatever I pass into it, anybody who is subscribed to it. So if somebody went .subscribe on it, then what would happen is this function here would get called. So in this case, it would just log to the console. But when I do .next, I could do it multiple times and it'll keep logging every single time I call it. So that's how subjects work in RxJS. So I have to fake that with React. And the way I would do it is we could just call it setNext for now to be cool about it. I mean, make it easy. And so I could do setNext and then I could take this data. Then I'm just calling a callback. But the difference is I could cancel it if I was using RxJS. Oh, but I can cancel it with React too. You just need a use effect. You just need a use effect here. So here you'd have like next, something like this. And as long as this object changes every time, this is going to work. And so what you would do here is you'd make a fetch call with some URI and then you would .then, blah, blah, blah. Now you can cancel a fetch. I just don't know it off the top of my head. You have to use a board controller and whatever. And then you would return and it would be like fetch.signal, is it signal or whatever? Fetch. I have no clue how you use the board controller, but it'd be like abort controller.abort. How about that? I don't know I don't know really what the code is. I'm making a guess. It's something like this. So you would use this to kill off your fetch. So in here, it would be URI and the data would be next or something like that. So this way you can continually make data calls. If you're using something else, I don't know how you cancel it. I know how you cancel RxJS stuff. This is like an idea of, I could do set next down here and it could affect this. But that's what I was wondering. Yeah, so the reason you would call set next here is if you have other stuff in your function. If there's more here, then you would do that. Otherwise, this form changed would literally be like, this would be like form changed, if that makes sense. You could just pass this setter as the, I wouldn't call it that, I would still call it set next. But you pass this into the on change on the form. So on OneForm, hopefully people are following this, you would pass this like that. And so that way you can just set next, or you could just, like I said, you could pass it in a different function that you pass in. But then you can do next here, and then you could do the same thing. So this is the way you could do side effects. And so I guess I don't need to build that in if you could just do it with the callback. Yeah, I mean, no matter what, it's always a callback. Yeah, okay, well, cool. At least I don't have to handle it. And it will work with something like this because the object that the on change will pass will be different every time. And that's why this would work the way you expect. Now, your component would keep re-rendering. So maybe you want to put this in like a custom hook or something like that. This will force your component to re-render every time. And even if it's in a custom hook, does that? Yeah, because the hook might get called again when the state updates, but that the return of the hook might not change. But wouldn't your whole component get, now I'm wondering about it. So yeah, I second guess myself on video. Good questions that I don't have answers for. So that's the end of this video. Just to show you the ideas that I changed and some things I want to do going forward and what I'm going to end up doing and how this is going to affect OneForm and how it's going to be even more awesome in the future. I think it's awesome. All right, cool. That's it. Bye.
Hey, thanks for watching that video on OneForm. If you'd like to give me any feedback, I'd appreciate that. I do read all the comments and I do respond to most of them. Some don't have a response. It's like, oh, great job. Okay, I'm not going to respond to that. I'll just put a little like on there. If you like what you see and you want to see more, feel free to leave some feedback. I'd appreciate it. I can take criticism. It's completely fine. But if you had anything positive to say, I would really appreciate that too, because I don't know who's watching this channel, right? I see there are views on the videos, but I don't know who they are. On my other channel where I do the code conversations and opinion pieces, I get more feedback on those. So I know roughly who's watching them, and then people will retweet me and stuff like that. But on this particular channel, I've got no feedback to work with so far, so I don't really know what you think, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.